In the vast tapestry of American history, few threads have been as integral into the fabric of our society as agriculture. But hidden within the fields and pastures lies a concept that has shaped the very foundation of farming: agricultural exceptionalism. Agricultural exceptionalism is a term often obscured in the shadow of agricultural production. It refers to the exclusion of farm workers from standards that apply to most other workers. But what does this concept truly entail? Defined as the differential treatment of agriculture in various legal frameworks, agricultural exceptionalism has far-reaching implications for our food system, environmental policies, labor practices, and social justice. This exclusion was born out of the successful efforts of Southern agricultural interests to exempt Black sharecroppers from the New Deal package of social reforms. The low wages and poor working conditions that farm workers describe result in part from the discriminatory treatment embedded in U.S. labor laws. During the New Deal era, Southern Democrats ensured farm workers were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act and Fair Labor Standards Act. These exclusions have led to systemic poverty and unsafe working conditions for farm workers who have some of the lowest wages and the highest poverty rates in the country. Farm work remains one of the most dangerous occupations, and yet only 31% of farm workers have health care insurance. Current proposals in Congress to increase the minimum wage would significantly benefit farm workers, helping to lift them out of poverty and ensure fairer treatment under the law. Real-world examples starkly illustrate the ongoing discrimination and modern-day slavery faced by agricultural workers, highlighted in the documentary Food Chains, directed by Sanjay Rawl, which exposes the severe conditions faced by migrant farm workers in Immokalee, Florida, who pick fruits and vegetables for large U.S. food wholesalers. The documentary follows the farm workers who form the Coalition of Immokalee Workers to raise awareness and improve their conditions. They organized a hunger strike to pressure Publix, a Florida-based food wholesaler, to pay them 1 penny more per pound of tomatoes. The film depicts the dire working conditions where farm workers earn an average of 45 cents per 32-pound bucket of tomatoes, requiring them to pick 125 buckets a day to earn about $56. The CIW's campaign successfully led to agreements with major companies like Taco Bell, Walmart, Burger King, and Whole Foods to pay more per pound of tomatoes, thereby doubling farm worker salaries and improving working conditions. This success story illustrates the power of consumer and worker solidarity in driving change. Despite these victories, exploitation remains rampant. The film shows farm workers living in cramped trailers with up to 15 people, earning an average of $40 a day. They face long hours and often leave their children with babysitters from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. The struggle for fair wages and humane working conditions continues as the coalition and its supporters now target other corporations to join the Fair Food Agreement, highlighting the ongoing fight against modern-day slavery in U.S. agriculture. These real-world examples highlight the intersection of historical exclusion from labor protections and contemporary exploitation, demonstrating that while progress has been made, the fight for justice and fair treatment for farm workers is far from over. The systemic issues rooted in agricultural exceptionalism continue to affect the lives of those who toil and feed the nation. By comparing the legal frameworks of past and present, we can see how agricultural exceptionalism has evolved. Historically, laws like the Clean Water Act, Section 404, and the Superfund liability provided significant exemptions for agriculture. In our journey through environmental policy, we encounter pivotal moments where the needs of agriculture intersect with the imperative of environmental protection. Enter the Clean Water Act of 1972, a watershed moment in the U.S. environmental law. Embedded within the Clean Water Act is Section 404, a provision addressing the regulation of dredged or fill material into U.S. waters, including wetlands. It is here that agricultural exemptions find their home. These exemptions carve out space for routine farming practices like plowing, seeding, and cultivating. Designed to accommodate the rhythms of farm life, they allow for the incidental runoff that accompanies these activities without the need for cumbersome permitting. Yet these exemptions come at a cost. While they alleviate regulatory burdens for farmers, they also raise concerns about the potential harm to workers in nearby communities. Agricultural workers, who are often on the front lines of pesticide and fertilizer application, face increased health risks. Their exposure to these chemicals, coupled with the absence of strict regulatory oversight, creates this precarious situation for those who labor in our fields. Neighboring communities, too, bear the burden of agricultural runoff. Pesticides and fertilizers can seep into local water supplies, posing health risks and environmental degradation. The balance between supporting agricultural productivity and safeguarding public health remains a contentious and complex issue. This brings us to the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980. Commonly known as Superfund, this landmark law empowered the EPA to hold entities accountable for hazardous waste contamination, marking a significant step forward in environmental protection. However, as with the Clean Water Act, agriculture found itself in a unique position within the Superfund framework. Agricultural operations, while not completely exempt, received certain protections to shield them from liability. These legal nuances reflect the ongoing tension between promoting agricultural productivity and upholding the environmental stewardship. The journey through agricultural exemptions within these landmark environmental laws reveals the complexities and compromises inherent in balancing competing priorities. Recent legislative changes like the Food Safety Modernization Act represent a significant shift towards greater accountability and regulation in the agricultural sector. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 marked an important moment in labor law, establishing minimum wage, overtime pay, and child labor protections for most American workers. However, agricultural workers were notably excluded from these fundamental rights. This exclusion was a product of its time, reflecting the social and political dynamics of the era. Fast forward to today, and the landscape of labor laws in agriculture has evolved, albeit gradually. The Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act of 1983 was a pivotal piece of legislation that aimed to provide protections for migrant and seasonal workers. This set the standards for wages, housing, transportation, and disclosure of working conditions, marking a step towards rectifying the historical exclusions of the FLSA. Yet the remnants of agricultural exceptionalism persist. Farm workers remain one of the most vulnerable labor groups in the United States, with many still not covered by minimum wage and overtime protections. The ongoing struggle for fair labor standards in agriculture is a testament to the deeply entrenched nature of these historical exclusions. As we reflect on the evolution of labor laws in agriculture, it becomes clear that while progress has been made, significant challenges remain. The journey towards equitable labor standards for agricultural workers is far from complete, and the legacy of agricultural exceptionalism continues to shape the realities of farm labor in America. As we move forward, significant changes in agricultural law reflect a trend towards a greater regulation and accountability. The Food Safety Modernization Act, enacted in 2011, is a prime example of this shift. This act aims to prevent food safety issues through proactive measures rather than reactive responses. Another significant change in law is the Fairness to Farm Workers Act. This legislation seeks to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to extend overtime pay protections to farm workers, addressing a long-standing disparity. The Agricultural Worker Program Act of 2019 established a path to legal status for undocumented farm workers to help improve their conditions and stability. The Improving Agricultural Workers Safety Act focuses on enhancing workplace safety standards and access to health care for farm workers, reflecting a growing recognition of their vital contributions and the need for equitable treatment. Together, these legislative efforts signal a gradual but meaningful shift towards addressing the historical injustices faced by farm workers and strengthening their rights and protections. The U.S. also plays a pivotal role in maintaining Codex standards, which aim to harmonize food safety regulations globally. This influences how we regulate agricultural practices at home, ensuring that U.S. products meet international safety standards and facilitating trade. Codex standards serve as a blueprint for food safety and quality, aiming to protect consumer health and facilitate fair practices in food trade on a global scale, with participation from over 180 member countries, including the United States. For the U.S., adherence to the Codex standards is not merely a matter of international cooperation, it's a strategic imperative. As one of the world's largest agricultural producers and exporters, the U.S. wields significant influence in shaping global food standards. By aligning domestic regulations with Codex guidelines, the U.S. ensures that its agricultural products meet international safety and quality standards. This not only enhances consumer confidence in the U.S. goods, but also facilitates trade by removing barriers to market access. The influence of Codex standards is evident in several key areas of the U.S. regulation. For example, the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point (HACCP) system, initially developed by NASA to ensure food safety for astronauts, has been integrated into the U.S. food safety regulations and is a core component of the FSMA. This system, which emphasizes identifying and controlling potential hazards throughout the food production process, aligns with Codex guidelines and enhances the overall safety of the food supply chain. Furthermore, the alignment with Codex standards has strengthened the U.S. regulations on pesticide residues in foods. By adhering to Codex maximum residue limits, the U.S. ensures that its agricultural products meet the international safety standard, thereby protecting consumer health and facilitating international trade. This harmonization also allows for more consistent enforcement of food safety laws and reduces the risk of trade disputes related to pesticide residues. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the United States Department of Agriculture work closely with Codex to ensure that the U.S. food safety regulations are aligned with global standards. This collaboration helps maintain the integrity of the U.S. food supply and enhances the competitiveness of American agricultural products in the global market. However, critics may perceive participation in the Codex as problematic or hypocritical for several reasons. They may argue that powerful nations, including the U.S., use their influence with the Codex to prioritize their own economic interests over public health and economical concerns. This leads to the establishment of standards that favor industrialized agricultural practices or disproportionately benefit certain industries, potentially at the expense of smaller producers or environmental sustainability. Despite these critiques, the influence of Codex Alimentarius underscores the intricate relationship between food safety, trade, and regulatory governance. Upholding the international standards of the U.S. reaffirms its commitment to promoting food security, protecting public health, and fostering a more resilient global food system. In conclusion, the state of agricultural exceptionalism in the U.S. is complex and evolving. While some aspects of exceptionalism continue, there is a clear trend towards increasing regulation and accountability. The evolution of agricultural law suggests a gradual shift away from blanket exceptions. Future policies must balance the needs of the agricultural sector with the rights of workers and the protection of the environment. As we move forward, understanding the history and current state of agricultural exceptionalism is essential for crafting fair and effective agricultural policies.